Hello, I'm Audrun Zuber-Skerritt, the editor of a series of monographs on Australian playwrights, and the producer of this series of video programs in which you will see and hear the playwrights themselves speak about their work. I'm sure it will make your study of Australian drama much more interesting if you can see the playwrights, hear them speak, and learn from them personally about their thoughts, views, and feelings. I think that these video programs will help you better understand and appreciate the author's work and analyze and interpret their writings. Each video program is designed to supplement the written monograph. If you do not have these books, they may be obtained from this address. This is the 5th video program in the series entitled Australian Playwrights Speak. The playwright is Stephen Sewell from Sydney, and the interviewer is Dr. John McCallum, Senior Lecturer in the Department of Drama at the University of New England in Armidale.
Why do you write?
I think it's a difficult question to answer without knowing a bit of the history. And if you don't mind, I'll kind of give that. I was born into the working class Catholic family with a certain, with a certain amount of unemployment and all the rest of it. The way what was kind of proposed to me as a child about the condition that we were in was that we were there because we were stupid. So the way to get out of the working class was to get education, get smart. The Catholic side of it was influential on me also in the sense that it opened me to moral questions and existential questions in a way. It may not be obvious to anyone who's not a Catholic how that happens, but through the kind of confessional and the probing of conscience and the importance that's placed on conscience, there's a lot of introspection involved. Now the combination of those two things drove me finally, or impelled me towards an interest in science after I gave up or lost my faith in God, or stopped believing in God. The questions that the previous discussion had, the previous kind of argument that I'd come out of was still important to me. That is, what are human beings doing on the earth? Where did we come from? Is there meaning? What kind of significance does human life have? I hope to find a kind of philosophical satisfaction for those kinds of questions through the pursuit of physics. Basically because there were there seem to be various reasons in physics itself, like the major kind of philosophical questions were being answered or raised anyhow in serious ways in the physical science. So I came to Sydney University, did a physics degree with the intention of pursuing a course, pursuing a scientific career. At that stage I got married when I was 18. The marriage was a disaster. It completely cocked up my degree. I finished the degree, just scraped through, and was nowhere. Right?
You didn't have the answers.
Well, I had plenty more questions, but very few answers by that stage, and also no means of supporting myself. So I hung around for a while. Completely withdrew from that circle of friends that I'd grown up with and that area of intellectuality that I'd been interested in, and took to a kind of drug-addicted bohemian life. where there was kind of more talk about drug addiction than fun. And certainly more about sex than there ever was.
More talk about sex than doing it.
I can't quite decide, whether there's more sex or less sex than you actually think's going on. But the end result of all that was that by the time I was 20, I didn't have anywhere to go and didn't know what to do. Now, that then revived in me an interest that I'd developed when I was about 16 in being a writer. The kind of point of the interest being that, not 16, sorry, earlier than that, when I was about 14, the first book that I'd ever sought out and bought myself was George Orwell's 1984. And being a kind of ignoramus about everything that sort of basically went on at that stage, I actually thought 1984 was about where I came from. But I didn't see any satire in it at all.
Straightforward, realistic novel.
Yeah, it seemed to be. I could see everyone in it, the priests and the brothers and the Prime Minister at the time. And the book really knocked me out, and I at that point, developed an interest. Like at some point, had kind of anticipated that I would like to do something like being a writer, like if someone could affect me in that kind of way, I would like to have the power or the skill to do that to other people. So, given the kind of disaster that my life had degenerated into, I decided to have a go at that. And by accident, I was involved with a kind of clandestine youth refuge that was part of Whitlam's youth schemes at the stage. I didn't know it was a youth refuge. It was only some time later that I found out when I actually started questioning the people who were running the place and found out that no, they weren't drug addicts themselves.
They worked there.
But really, they were social workers. So the part of their program was a theatrical program. I met up with those people. I was initially writing a novel. These theatre people wanted a night's entertainment. They had two half-hour shows. They needed a third. They knew I was interested in writing, asked me to write a half-hour show. I did it, found it really easy to do. Then really enjoyed the whole kind of production process and the working with other people that was quite different to the sort of work experience of a novel. As I never finished the novel.
Did you do acting and directing?
Yeah, I acted in it, set construction, stage management. Because it was fringe and it was tiny, you basically did everything. And so I guess what I'm saying is that through a combination of who I was and where I was and the accidents that I'd experienced was why I started writing, or how I started writing. Now, why I continued writing was that I became successful at it, and people wanted to listen to me, and B, I fell in love with it. I actually really do enjoy writing. I like the process. I like the discipline of it, and it makes me feel human. To a large extent, writing for me is a way of being, and that was always quite important to me. It's important to everyone to know what they are. Well, I now know I'm a writer.
So it's partly a question of a personal quest.
Yeah.
Personal search. What about the writer's role in society? Do you feel a strong sense of your responsibility to the society or the community that you're in?
I feel, again, it's a complicated question, so the answer is complicated. I don't feel that it's my role to direct people's attention or to act in a leadership function towards the audience or towards society at large. I think that the most immediate responsibility that a writer has is to write well, and to if they, in writing well, I think it really has to do with being honest with yourself and in your heart. But through that process of revealing your heart and being open, you can make contact with the hopes and ambitions and fears and desires of the society of which you're a part. Like an individual is not, we're not separate individuals somehow kind of communicating through symbols in an obscure way.
It's a social experience.
Yeah. Like when I first started writing, excuse me, when I first started writing, my attention was very much on the audience, what the audience could understand, what their prejudices and concerns and fears were. But increasingly I've turned away from the audience and simply tried to write as well as I can. And to the extent that the writing for me has become I mean, I know this sounds perverse, but a self-revelatory, like not to the audience, but to me myself, experience. The experience of the audience has similarly grown.
It's a form of analysis you're writing too, though, isn't it?
Public and analytical. Yeah. Well, I'm trying, like one of the things, say one of the most important things that I've been trying to do is analyse and understand power and the relationship that individuals have to power. And now the experience of power is, I mean, it's probably the most universal experience there is, like after life, death, and
so some of those things we were talking about before. Yeah. Many people have claimed they find your plays difficult and too long and too complex and all that sort of stuff. Do you think that your writing for the stage requires a trained theatre audience, or an audience used to going to the theatre, or is it more accessible to people who aren't used to the conventions of the stage?
I'm sorry, I go to the theatre very little myself. I think that, in a sense, it's non-theatrical. I don't write theatre as theatre, if you understand what I mean.
Yes. Yeah.
What I tend to write about are concerns that, as far as I understand, aren't normally perceived as being in the province of theatre or the theatrical experience. So that, on the one hand, my material is quite conventional. You know, it has a story, it has the kind of climax denouement, that sort of stuff. And often, say it's called soap opera because of its conventionality.
Soapbox opera, Harry Kipak's called one of them.
Yeah. And to some extent I don't mind it being called soap opera because, like, probably the most popular form of entertainment is exactly soap opera. So at least there's, you know, an audience, like that's what people, it sort of implied that by those results, or, you know, by that kind of observation, that plenty of people enjoy it.
But you don't have a strong, are you saying that you don't have a strong consciousness of wanting to change people's views or wanting to change society through your writing?
Yeah, no. I think it can happen. I mean, it happened to me. You know, I read a book and was changed. But that's, like, my intention isn't to sort of sneakily grab an audience and turn it into something that it wasn't at the beginning. That may happen, as I said, but I guess what I'd, you know, really like to do, well, there'd be two things. One would be to make a kind of theatre that I and my friends would like to see, so that we can go in to a place that's normally excluded to us because of the type of material that's usually put on there, and not feel offended by what we see, and be entertained for a little while. So to that extent, preaching to the converted, as it were. I mean, I don't at all mind that when people claim that that's what I'm doing, because I'm not, I'm not trying to convert anyone. I'm not a priest.
What preaching's for, anyway, really.
Yeah. And the other thing is, is to uncover for people, like if there is an intention about what I want to do to an audience, it's to uncover for people the dilemmas and the pains that they feel, that they experience, that as a result of the recognition of the way those things affect me. Like as I said before, people aren't unique. Everyone thinks they've got secrets, but when the secrets start coming out, they're all the same. We all had the same nightmares, the same fears.
Yeah.
And in finding them in yourself, you reveal them to other people as well.
Do you think we have the same dreams, maybe, deep down?
Yeah.
Like the dreams you list with Chris in Dreams in an Empty City, which is your last play, of fulfilment and peace and, all the things. Do you think that we have those underneath our nightmares?
I'm not sure. I feel more pessimistic, I suppose, at the moment, that those are topmost.
You imply there that that you take a fairly bleak view. Are you gloomy about life, about the prospects of life?
I guess at the moment I feel terrified, and it's a funny kind of terror. It's quite difficult to explain. For one reason or another, the prospect of war and nuclear war especially seems very pressing. And to some extent I've been preoccupied with it throughout all the work. It raises various things for me, and the last kind of one being that if it's sort of true, if it happens, then that's the end of history. And so I guess like for the first time in history, I think, it can be seriously contemplated that the human race will annihilate itself and annihilate human values and all the rest of it. In which case, you're sort of in a moment of historical despair where it's necessary, like somehow it sort of proposes itself as a necessary thing to actually go back and have a look at the last 4 million years and, try and kind of work out what those things were about, what the human adventure has been about. I know it's illogical to do that, but somehow imaginatively you're inclined to kind of, or I feel inclined to do that, to try and, before the judgment is finally passed, before we judge ourselves as being unfit for the earth, to take the opportunity to have a look at those things.
It's very much the vision at the end of Dreams in an Empty City of Chris's wonderful final speech, isn't it? If we are facing annihilation, then we will have made the world holy by our belief in it, or by our commitment. It seems to me that is a very optimistic thing to be saying in the face of his imminent death and the collapse of capitalism which is going on around him.
Yeah. It's a minimal optimism that there's a value in, an elementary value in being alive.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me that was kind of what I'd personally been driven to. That everything else might be betrayed or become, reveal itself as an illusion. But there's a minimalist position that you can take. It's sort of like an existential Cartesian slogan.
But it seems that Chris's speech at the end of that play, it doesn't come across in the theatre as minimalist in a way. I mean, I know what you mean, but it's a wonderful cry, life-affirming, a shout of... I mean, it's one of the strongest sort of affirmative statements about the value of the human experiment in all recent drama, I think. It seems more than just minimalist to me.
Oh, good.
Certainly, in comparison to the end of The Blind Giant is Dancing, with Burn, they seem to me to be opposites.
Yeah, and to some extent they're the same character.
Yes, yes. Before we talk specifically about some of the plays, there's just some other general things. There are various belief structures or analytical systems which inform all your plays. I'm thinking, of course, of Catholicism as one, and Marxism as another, and Judaism too seems to come into it too, into several of them. Are you conscious of juggling these systems or of testing them against each other, or is that part of a personal search, or?
Oh, absolutely. What I say, to take the example of Marxism, like I tend to be like a part of the contradictory nature is that my contradictory nature is that I fall in love very easily, like I'm desperate for something to believe in, but at the same time kind of highly skeptical. So a lot of the plays so far have been kind of throwing into a sort of dramatic crucible various belief systems, Marxism as one example, to see how they come out at the end, like what survives. Are they real? Are they true? Like to assault them, to skeptically assault them, and in the various kinds of clashes between Marxism, Catholicism, Marxism, Judaism, to try and wean out for myself and for an audience, that the wheat from the chaff.
But have you come to any conclusions? Are you a Marxist now? Or would you call yourself a Marxist?
Yes, I would, but it wouldn't be the first thing that I call myself.
What would?
A man, that's all. I want to live, and I don't want to feel pain. And I want to stop those things that are causing me pain.
Catholicism, getting back to these, well, I don't know about Judaism, but Catholicism and Marxism seem to be central right through all your plays. You said before that you lost your faith before you went and studied physics and things here. The central issue, and to keep coming back to Dreams in an Empty City because it's the most recent as we're recording this, a central issue in that seems to be Chris's faith and whether that's going to be useful to him in dealing with his pain. There's a line in it early on when Chris is rehearsing the play and he asks the writer of the play about Ramirez, and he says, is Ramirez Christ? Because if he is, the play's bullshit, and if he isn't, it doesn't make sense. Can I ask you the same question about Chris? Is that a portrait of a secular Christ?
It's a it's confused and confusing. The original intention was to write a secular passion play. But doing without a God Christ. Like Christopher is Greek for the Christ bearer, so that Chris as such isn't Christ, but the kind of latter 20th century, an end of history Christ bearer. But the ambiguities of the Christian story were what kind of drove the ambiguities of the play, Dreams. Like Chris is still a difficult character, or most people found it implausible, right? That was a general criticism of the show, that the central character didn't work. That was a criticism from the beginning.
In what way it didn't work? What?
It was interesting. In the first workshop we had, it was that Chris was too Christ-like, too much the wimp of the Gospels. Like, if you look at the Gospels, there's only one dramatic moment. That's in Gethsemane, when he asks his Father to take the cup away from him. At all other points, at no other point is there any kind of expression of doubt or fear or uncertainty about the mission. And the Gospels are kind of constructed as though, like exactly in that way, that this is the conclusion of a prophecy. So you don't question in a sense, the motivation of the character, but put a human being there instead, one that sweats and is fearful and all the rest of it, and Christ looks like a fool, and like historically, like Dostoevsky and stuff, that's exactly the way they have treated the Christian message, or the Christian story. So I was confronted with this huge problem of, without realising it at the time, I started off full of bravery about this is what I, at the end of history, like that was the notion, like I wanted to write something about the end of history. I wanted to, use the passion model, but without the ability to have the only thing that makes sense in the passion, that is that this character is being crucified because he's God.
Yeah.
So the first draft, as I said, it didn't work, and that line in the play that remains, "You can't have a secular Christ," came out of the workshop. Right, that was one of the things that was sort of proposed to me. Then the second draft of that character made him more worldly. It made him a knowledgeable, knowing character. But the problem with that was that he then seemed, it was hard to distinguish his position from all the other creeps who were patrolling around the place, threatening each other and, plotting mass destruction. The third draft, which is what we performed, kind of veered uneasily between those two positions. And Russell Kiefel, the actor who played the character, he himself, went through those sorts of transformations of the kind of gospel-like Christ through to a criminal gangster type. So the problem was never solved, in my opinion, and from the experience, of the audience and the reviews and stuff. The problem was actually never cracked in the production, and I'm now at the moment doing another draft to try and solve it.
Just to divert a bit, I'm wondering how much value you find in working with actors on your script? I mean, whether workshopping them in rehearsal and seeing how they come across and whether actors can handle it. Is there value in that?
Oh, yeah, it's immensely valuable, and I wish really that there was more opportunity to do it. In that case, in the case of Dreams, we only had a week's workshop with, I think it was 5 actors, most of whom didn't go into the subsequent production. And then the rehearsal was 5 or 6 weeks long. So it was like it needed, well, it would have been immensely valuable to have, you know, a longer time.
Yep.
But most theatre companies, even state theatre companies, don't even make that kind of facility available.
You had it when you were working on Welcome to the Bright World with Nimrod, didn't you? Opportunity to work through the script with the actors.
No.
We were just commissioned to write.
Yeah. That was a disaster. I mean, the play, I think the play's fine. Well, I mean, it's too long, it needs another draft and all the rest of it. But, like, I was still writing that 2 weeks into a 4-week rehearsal. There was only 4 weeks to rehearse the show.
And that's a mammoth show to do.
Yeah.
4 weeks.
Yeah, people were going nuts. Like, I suppose that one of the things that I've always felt is the incredible generosity that actors and everyone bringing, like the crew and stuff, that those people bring to my work. Like, typically it's not the kind of punch-out scene, you know, that's sort of indicated in the Dreams rehearsal. Like, there's the people that I've worked with have all tended to be very open, compassionate, generous people who are prepared to put up with, you know, receiving their lines
the night before.
This, you mentioned a couple of times about the plays, the length of the plays, and it is something that some critics have commented on. Would you like to be allowed to keep the 5-hour drafts that sort of length? I mean, do you feel constrained by having to always cut back?
There's a kind of implicit contract with the audience. If I was, as at one point I was invited to write a 9-hour show for the South Australian Theatre Company. Like, as it turned out, I didn't have enough time, so it didn't go through. But I'd be really happy and pleased to write, you know, a 9-hour show that would be shown, like, be a kind of festival type event. That'd get, you know, it might get 1 or 2 performances or productions, but to use that amount of time over several nights would be a good thing. It'd be a really enlivening thing, an exciting challenge to do that. But I think that, I mean, I may be wrong. Well, it's certainly open to contestation that the kind of maximum time, you know, that you can have an audience for one night, I think, is about 3 hours. So I tend to write, you know, within that discipline. Now, when I overwrite, as say Bright World, I think was 4 hours. If we'd had more time and resources. Like, to give an example, one of the resources that was available in South Australia was a dramaturg with whom I worked. Her name was Julie Rose. Now, she was able to point out those areas where there was overriding, you know, and suggest cuts and stuff in a way that I couldn't, because I was simultaneously writing, trying to kind of finish the show, so I didn't have the time myself, you know, to go over it and cut it out. So that when those, like, I mean, with 4 hours, like, typically it's not all that hard, you know, to see the points where the lines being repeated, or there's some kind of strange curlicue in the middle of an argument that needn't be there.
But even in the first drafts, the first published drafts, which we get when we get the the Currency Program series of editions of your plays, there doesn't seem to be anything that hasn't got a point. I mean, there's no redundancy in those scripts. Is that because that comes after the process, or? I mean, there must be some sacrifice. Every time you have to cut out an embellishment or a development of an argument, you're sacrificing something.
That's true, but to some extent, you're referring to two different experiences. A production is a complex thing, and oftentimes, say, the skill of an actor will cover half a page of dialogue. Now, to read a text is all you've got is a text of the words, and it may be hard for a person only familiar with a play through the text to imagine how something might be implied or created without the words, but oftentimes it can be. So, I mean, a play, the text is not a play, the production is a play. And as such, it's a very complicated experience.
I've in fact found with students that I've taught your plays, where we've studied your plays, that they have considerable difficulty approaching them at first simply through the text.
Right. I mean, I have no idea how you teach English or how you teach literature, but I wonder if there is difficulty in kind of analysing a play or understanding a play, that one way to overcome it might be to do a sort of rehearsed reading type thing, so that the students in this case that we're talking about actually confront the problems of character and story from in a way, say, analogous to what an actor would.
To workshop and rehearse scenes and things. Yes, it lifts. I think, I mean, with all playwrights, but with your writing particularly, it lifts off the page as soon as you stand up with it. So that's some advice.
We've been talking about your style earlier, not here. Epic, cinematic, all sorts of words come to mind. How do you think of your style? And what sort of style do you think you write in?
Again, it's quite difficult for me to answer that, basically because I'm ignorant. As I said, I don't actually go to very much theatre, and I don't know a great deal about theatre history or theory. Like, I've heard it described as epic, and I suppose that what that basically means is that it's very long, and there are lots of people on stage.
Covers a lot of things. Yeah.
Like the plays are what they are because of their substance. Like, the form of the things comes from what I'm trying to deal with. To give an example from Dreams, my interest in Dreams wasn't especially in the financial story. Like, the financial story is a kind of backdrop for the kind of moral degradation of the world, against which, like, the moral questions are being analysed or being brought together. And I think that's sort of one of the imbalances at the moment, that the financial story is actually, instead of just being a backdrop, it really kind of overwhelms and invades the foreground as well. So I'm trying to deal with that. But it wasn't my intention when I was writing the thing to show what a pack of bastards businessmen were. If it was, I could have written just the finance story. What I wanted to do was to create a world and then find people inside that world and how they slithered around or stalked around or found their way through the various cracks and crevices of the thing. So there was a dialectic, if you understand what I mean, that I wanted to set up between, the moral story and the financial story. That was one of the things. Now, you know, if there's that kind of contradiction being proposed or that kind of interaction being proposed, you actually are required structurally, you know, to do certain things, to juxtapose certain scenes, to have a certain length, to have a certain number of actors or characters. What I'm saying is that I don't feel as though I'm kind of. I feel like I'm working in the dark a lot when I'm writing. That I'm not operating under the lights of, you know, Brecht, of contemporary dramatists, because I don't know their work. What I'm trying to do is, and I mean, I know I'm ignorant and I'm not proud of it, and I'll explain subsequently, if you like, why that's the case. But so it's not under the influence of anyone, and I don't have models. Right. What I'm trying to do is tell the story of our world, and to the you know, so it's form following substance.
I think it's that which people think of as epic, or at least some. I mean, that's one way in which people use the word epic. Not so much because it's got lots of scenes and lots of characters and it's a big story and they last a long time, but because you're placing the characters in their social political context all the time. Or I mean, you're exploring the relations between their context.
Right.
And I think that's what. That's certainly what I would call an epic approach, where you're not just concerned with people doing things among themselves or by themselves. But if people fall in love, or fall out of love, or are frightened, then they're doing that not just as individuals experiencing things in your play, but it's got all sorts of resonances and things in the social world that they live in.
Right.
And that's what I would call epic.
Okay, I'm epic.
Right.
Thank God I knew someone would tell me.
There's another label which people use, just while we're sorting out these labels, that's expressionist. Do you think, I think it relates back to what you were saying at the very beginning in answer to the question of why you write, that subjective personal exploration, which is such a strong part of your work, is expressionist in some way, that the paranoia which one gets in a lot of this, you know, that feeling of fear and paranoia that you get when it's in some of your action. And again, this is getting back for students who are only reading the text and who haven't had an opportunity to see it, is the vital importance of sound in all your plays, all those strange sound effects which keep coming in, wind bells and banging shutters, things. Do you have anything to say on that?
They're really cues for the technical and production people. So, I mean, as I said, like a production is a very complicated thing. The writer isn't the only creative person involved, nor are the actors. You know, there are sound people, lighting people, set design, and all those people. Now, with the sort of resources that a modern theatre has, it's what I'd like to. Well, I basically want to use the full potentials that are available. So I tend to kind of indicate, perhaps too closely, the use of sound, but really that's a cue for the person doing the sound to have a free hand, if you understand what I mean. Like it's an acknowledgement of that area and the necessity, like my kind of feeling of that being required. Now the fact is, I have a very poor visual imagination and sound imagination. So a lot of the times I get it wrong, and they tend not to be put in, but other ways are found. Yeah. And yes, you're right. You know, if I understand you correctly, like a lot of the scenes that I write are internal scenes. They're, say, especially in Welcome to the Bright World, they're scenes in some of Max's scenes are very much hallucinations or personal nightmares. And the use of sound there as an ability, as a thing to create the sort of non-realistic effect or the eeriness or whatever is something that that a modern theatre, gives you the ability to do.
Well, in the Adelaide production of Dreams, Alan John played a score, I suppose it was, wasn't it, underneath most of the action.
Yeah.
Live in the theatre.
Yeah, I hope to work with Alan on an opera at some time in the next couple of years. So that's an area that I'm kind of interested in going into further.
What are you working on at the moment? What's coming up?
I'm rewriting Dreams, as I said. I'm just about to finish the second act. In a week's time, I've I'm working on a movie called Isabel Eberhard about a Russian romantic at the turn of the century. Basically, there's a possibility of writing this opera for the bicentennial, which would be the next part of the overall play structure. Like there's a project involved of 9 plays, 3 trilogies, starting with Father, and the 5th play, Dreams, is the second part of the second trilogy. The last part being the opera called The Human Ground. So that's coming up, but basically what I want to do, at least for I think another couple of years, is to write movies. I'm sick of not earning any money.
Can you just say some more about why the play is grouped in 3? Is it a thematic or a subject significance, or?
I'm not sure yet. The best way I can kind of think of it is a path. Barry Hill, the Melbourne short story writer, once said to me that I know this sounds crazy, but sometimes I think about it this way: that writing is like a Zen way. It's a way, a path, and like the sort of personal interests that I have in it. What interests I do have, like just inside me, what it does to me and for me, is exactly that. It's a way of discovery. So that the plays are linked in terms of the investigation of questions that are cumulative questions, where an answer is then kind of proposes another question. To give an example of that, Blind Giant, I kind of finally came back to using the material, like what I'd gained out of writing the previous plays was brought to bear on Australian society in a sort of relatively straightforward consideration of large P politics, political power and sexual power within a kind of explicitly political environment. Now that, there are other questions involved, but that was at least a setting. At the end of that play, you have that hideous screaming of Byrne, where the central character's finally kind of flipped and imagines himself as now being a kind of minor devil in this hellish world, who's going to make it as tough as tax for everyone else.
You return in that play to some of the issues, obviously, that you explored first in Father, Father We Loved on the Beach by the Sea.
Yeah.
Are you going to return to other issues that you've explored in Traitors and Welcome to the Bright World, or is that something you've now explored fully?
I think I'm finished with those questions. The larger, the grosser lines of politics, of power, of psychology. What I think I've kind of explored for myself and satisfied myself, what the skeleton of the structure is. What I want to do in my subsequent work is to find the variations and the subtleties and the flavours of some of the things. So I don't anticipate, if you understand what I mean, I've always resisted the being categorised as a political writer. I mean, other people call me a political writer, but I've never called myself a political writer. In my subsequent work, I don't expect to deal again with those kinds of questions. I think I've sort of settled it for myself, and I want to start looking at some other things.
The movies that you hope to write to make all this money, are they part of the series of trilogies, or?
No, that's a separate.
It's a
separate project.
And comedy is another issue. I think I remember reading somewhere that you said once that you were going to write a comedy. Obviously, there are strong comic elements in all your plays. Do you mean that you're going to write something much more in the? I mean, if you're going to put plays in genres, I suppose Dreams in an Empty City exploits the genre of a thriller. Do you still want to write more comedy?
Yeah, I do. I recently had an experience, where I wanted to, one of the movies that I intend to write is about an affair. It's a story that someone told me. It's a fascinating story. It's a beautiful story. And when I started thinking about it, I intended and will subsequently call it Winter's Journey. But the person to whom I told it, the person who told it to me, said that was a stupid title, that the experience had been much happier for her, and why didn't I call it Spring Song? And it kind of addressed my attention, I suddenly felt like that my imaginative disposition is towards the bleak and the black.
Those are the only things worth writing comedy about.
And then I saw Woody Allen's Hannah and Her Sisters, and just thought it was the best thing that I've ever seen in my life. And how I'd love to write stuff like that was kind of, not sort of desperately clutching at the edge of the cliff saying, it's great to be around.
At least I'm still here.
Then on the contrary, to have a sort of a positive, a strongly positive affirmation with that sort of forgiveness that Woody Allen brings to bear on his subjects. And so, yeah, I do really want to investigate those things, just to cheer myself up a little bit.
It's been said many times, though, that black comedy particularly is a distinctively Australian approach to life in general, that we laugh at the pain. You had a slogan which you said you were using, I think it was while you were writing Blind Giant is Dancing, which is go for the pain. We expect now that you won't, is that right, or will you laugh at the pain? I don't know. I think one of the mistakes that I made, that I have made in my own life, I think, excuse me,
was to find a reason for optimism. Like it was a quest to find a reason to be optimistic. Imagining, you know, that, like I never kind of really proposed it in that way, and when I did, I realised how stupid it was. You know, that you could find evidence, that you could go out and search in the world for evidence for why one should be optimistic, or alternatively, you know, in a kind of scientific way, weigh up the kind of pros and cons and come to a calculus of optimism or pessimism. But it seems to me, especially like in the course of writing Dreams, I realised that that was wrong, and that optimism and pessimism are sort of personal attitudes that are brought to bear on any situation. The two people can look at exactly the same thing and reach and have completely opposite personal judgments about the meaning of, in terms of optimism or pessimism. Like I think, you know, that I have a pessimistic kind of view that I want to change, and I think I can change. I can change that without. I mean, that's a personal struggle, if you understand what I mean.
You're right. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Yep.